And now on the line is Jim Clarken. Jim, as many of you know, is the CEO of Oxfam Ireland, and Jim is also a co-founder and spokesperson of the People's Vaccine Alliance Ireland. Jim, welcome to the programme.
Thanks very much, Aaron. Good to speak with you.
Okay, Jim, this is my first interview with you in several years, although I've interviewed many other members of Oxfam Ireland since we last spoke on their FM. I am interviewing you today in your capacity as a co-founder and spokesperson of the People's Vaccine Alliance Ireland, which was launched last week. This is a big question, Jim, and it's self-evident the answer to a lot of people. But could you start off by telling me about the background to why the alliance was launched last week?
Sure, Darren. But first of all, I'll say I'm disappointed it's taken us this long to chat with each other. But I do follow you closely, and I know that we connect in lots of other ways. So the People's Vaccine Alliance Ireland was launched last week, and the reason for this is that we see, and this is a collection of people from the medical profession, NGOs and human rights organizations, trade unions and activists, who just see that the current situation in relation to vaccinations across the world is hugely unequal, unfair, and it's leaving a very large part of the world behind. And unless we do something fairly dramatic, this is likely to be the case for quite a long period to come. So we have come together as a group of organizations and people who care about this, who see the inequity and the unfairness of it, and want to put pressure on the authorities, both in Ireland and across Europe, to change their current position, because unless we do that, we do fear that many, many people will suffer unnecessarily from the results of COVID across the world.
I've done a couple of interviews over the last year or so on the impact of COVID on developing countries. In your own experience, Jim, how big has the impact of COVID-19 been in the developing countries in which you work?
It's been huge. I mean, we know that, and you know, in this part of the world, I mean, I think there's a sense that we're coming towards the end of COVID. I mean, certainly that's sort of the narrative in certain quarters. But we know that 100,000 people are dying of COVID every week, particularly in countries without sufficient access to the vaccine. And we've seen the impact of it both from the health point of view. So you're talking about in countries where there are already quite weak health systems that are being overwhelmed because of the impact of COVID. And you're also talking about the economic impact. So, you know, because of lockdowns and because of the way that a lot of people across the world have to make a living through casual work, through daily work, through being paid on that kind of basis. And when a lot of that work has dried up, there's an immediate impact in relation to hunger and poverty. So we've seen a lot of the work that collectively the world has done over the past 20-25 years in fighting global poverty and inequality actually being reversed, and reversed quite dramatically. And you know, that's tragic for those involved. And the world has made some good progress, and you know, it would be shocking if we allowed something like this, where we see a solution staring us in the face, to allow that to happen. And you know, we are seeing, you know, huge suffering from this, and we're really concerned that it's going to get much worse. And we're seeing the third wave now in African countries, for example, that just don't have the capacity to be able to handle this.
Yeah, we're doing this interview to talk about the People's Vaccine Alliance and why it was launched, but like that, it's probably the biggest thing you're probably in Oxfam, is it, that you're working on at the moment, is the food problem, is it, because of COVID?
Well, I mean, we work across a whole range of areas. So we, you know, in our humanitarian life-saving work, we see the impacts of COVID in a country like Yemen. It's been in war for 7 years. It was already desperately struggling. You know, so many people are on the brink of starvation. And you could say that about a number of other crisis countries, if you will, where COVID is just the last straw almost that is pushing countries over the edge. So that's certainly the impact there is dramatic and is life-threatening and, you know, hugely damaging. And then in developing countries where kind of a more development program rather than a life-saving one is happening, you see a lot of that program not being able to work properly because of the restrictions, because of the disease, because of illness. And then you see, you know, people's life and livelihoods being dramatically affected because of COVID. So, you know, it is, I mean, what we have said is that it's exacerbating inequalities that already exist between the global north and the global south, and also inside countries where the wealthy elite can have access to health care, but most others can't. Or the wealthy elite can have access to, or are in a position to continue to build their own wealth. And we've seen that, many of the billionaires across the world have dramatically increased their wealth in the last 18 months. Whereas people at the bottom of the economic pile are getting poorer and getting quite desperate.
It must be very traumatic to be in a hospital in many developing countries now if you don't have enough oxygen. It's dangerous as well because you could catch COVID. But it must be very emotionally, physically painful, to see the suffering.
Absolutely, and I've spoken to colleagues in, for example, India, my counterpart in India, who has lost friends in hospital for want of oxygen. So, this is very basic. All we're looking for is oxygen, and people just don't have it because those health systems require ongoing investment, and they require development over many, many years. And this is affecting all of that.
Okay, you mentioned there you're calling for more oxygen. Can you tell me overall or a summary of what exactly are you calling for in the Alliance?
Okay, so the Alliance launched formally last week here in Ireland, although we've been working together for a number of months. We were lucky to have Mike Ryan from the WHO. We had Mustaqim Dagama, who's a South African permanent mission to the World Trade Organization, and I'll speak about that in a minute. We had Winnie Byanyima from UNAIDS. We were lucky to have Mayo Rivas, who's a Paraguayan Irish person who's an activist on this, and Senator Mary Higgins and Ciara Conlon and others. And what we're trying to highlight is the fact that this virus is out of control, as we know, and if we continue vaccinating at the kind of rate we're currently doing, it could be 3 or 4 years. We could be into 2024 before the world has reached herd immunity. And that is, first of all, that's a real injustice and a sense of inequality for people in developing countries who won't get the vaccine. It also puts the rest of us at risk because we've said all along, I think that the mantra has always been nobody's safe until everybody's safe. So if we're leaving half or 3/4 of the world population unsafe, then it has impacts everywhere. It has impacts in terms of variants and so on that will continue to develop. But primarily, we just think it's not fair and it's not right. This part of the world has benefited dramatically. It's amazing what's been done from a scientific point of view to get the vaccines ready so quickly, but this part of the world has bought up most of them, and it's hoarding them. We have more than in the global north. We have more than we'll need, and so there's that element to it. But primarily the problem here is that there just isn't enough vaccine to vaccinate everybody, and we have a solution to that. And our solution is what we call the TRIPS waiver. So this is a waiver of the intellectual property and technical know-how rights at the WTO. It is a process that can be used. It's been promoted by South Africa and India. Over 100 countries have signed up to it. The US are now in favour. And, the big blocker here is Europe, and Ireland is part of that. And we just cannot see why it makes no sense. This idea that somehow pharmaceutical companies will lose out. It's important to remember that public money was heavily invested in the development of these vaccines. The companies didn't do it on their own. The companies will make plenty of profit from what happens in the next years. There's no doubt about that, and that's fine. But it's not right that a small group of companies holds basically the keys to the lives of millions of people across the world, and something can be done. So what we're calling for is the Irish government to change its position on this TRIPS waiver, to support the waiver at both at Europe and at the WTO, to use its voice, and it has a very important and influential voice and very credible voice in terms of its commitment to international development and international peace. But this is a gap that's problematic for Ireland, and we're calling for Ireland to change its position, to support the WTO waiver, and to ensure that vaccines are made quickly. We've identified companies across the world who are ready and willing to start producing vaccines if they were given the IP and the technical know-how. It's possible, it's doable. The solution is staring us in the face, and Ireland needs to support it.
And do you know what reason the Irish government and other governments in Europe are given to why they don't support it? Because it's surprised, even if the US are in favour of it, I'm surprised that the Western European governments aren't,
Well, it's a fair point. We haven't been given any proper explanation. There's some spurious suggestions that it will cause a problem. It'll create a precedence for pharma companies, and how will future drugs be created. But actually, the precedence is already there. Years ago, when we had the the HIV/AIDS global problem, and we still do. But one of the solutions to that was for the intellectual property and the know-how in relation to the ARVs being shared with generic companies in developing countries. Transformed the fight against HIV and AIDS in terms of providing affordable drugs that people could use every day that could live normal lives. So the precedence is there. So that argument doesn't work. The idea that the global south doesn't have the capacity or know-how to produce vaccines, that's quite offensive, to be perfectly honest. And that's one of the things that's been trotted out. India is considered to be the pharmacy to the world. There are a very large percentage of all the drugs that are being used in the world are produced in India. We know that there are many companies across numerous countries who have the capacity and would be willing to do this tomorrow if they were given that. So, I mean, and the other thing is this idea that the COVAX facility, COVAX is a voluntary mechanism where countries can essentially donate surplus vaccines. But I mean, it's not right for half the world to be waiting for crumbs from the table of what's left over here or anywhere else. I mean, we just don't have enough capacity to produce this stuff. That's the bottleneck. That's the thing that needs to be solved. The solution is there, staring us in the face, and we can do with it.
Okay, you wanted to tell me something about one of your speakers last Thursday, I think.
Well, no, just to say, I mean, we had an amazing group of speakers, and when you have leaders like that who've been supporting this, and we are the People's Vaccine Ireland is part of a wider network across the world of similar movements of people and organisations and activists who see this possible. First of all, see the injustice of what's happening right now, see a solution staring us in the face, and are advocating for governments to change their positions in order to support this. We know it can be done. We know there's a precedence for doing it before. We have not heard a single solid argument against it that really stands up. So we need to move on with this. It has to happen. No, I suppose the only other thing is that people often want to know how they can get involved. Sometimes these things seem so remote and seem so large and lofty and kind of beyond a lot of us. But actually, there's a movement here. It's real Irish people who are supporting this, who are putting pressure on their local TDs. So I would suggest if anybody has the interest or feels they strongly enough about this, as so many people do, that they can contact their local TD. Say that this is what I believe. I've been lucky enough to be vaccinated, or I'm going to be vaccinated. My loved ones are safe, and I just see the injustice in allowing a large portion of the world to just languish for years and years, and possibly and suffering dramatically and dying from this disease. So please be active. It's very doable if they access our website, the People's Vaccine Ireland website. They can find ways in which to do that, and we'll support them to do that. So we'd encourage people to be active and to get involved in the campaign.